Okay, welcome, brethren, believers in the original Shepherd's Rod message, to our final discussion about the controversy over the Ezekiel 47 charts. We presented some earlier stuff on this, but there's a big stir of recent over which version of the Ezekiel 47 chart should we be using. Well, we have some more information, some more data, some more facts to get this all straightened out. So if you're interested, you should know. Please come on in and join us as we conclude our discussion about Ezekiel 47 and which chart to use. So, once again, this is a presentation brought to you by upa7.org, and the issue today is more controversy over Ezekiel 47. So what are some of the things that have come up in the last month or so? What about a report that Brother Hadif was not happy with the colorized Ezekiel 47 hunter chart? And this comes from Sister Bonnie. So we're going to look at that claim in more detail. Why is no one dealing with the East Gate issue? This is really critical because, after all, the chart is a vision, is a timeline. So the East Gate is really important. Very few people even acknowledge it or look at it, so this is really crucial. And the question, who first published the large colorized version of the Ezekiel 47 chart? This is the one that is used by Mountaindale and Salem, and Waco's got a version of it. So the question, where did this come from? Was it authorized by Brother Hadif or not? And we're going to find out the answer to that. And then we're going to look at a shocking development that came up in the last week or so, as there's new colorized versions of the chart from Shepherd's Rod Volume 2, page 194. And the question is, are these authorized or not? So we'll address that. And then finally, if we're authorized to publish a version of the Ezekiel 47 chart, which one? We really need to know, because there's a lot of versions out there. So we'll look at all of that. So please come on in. And we'll start with this claim. This is a rather shocking claim. This came from the admin of the Truth Tellers site, Rob Peralta. He's also one of the leaders of the pre-11th hour ministry that broke away about a year ago from Mountaindale. So he made this claim a couple weeks ago. Sadly, brethren, our arch deceiver has found several areas to come into the Lord's Elijah message and trick and deceive us. Oh my. One of those areas is the charts. Brother Hadif was inspired of the Lord to post many charts, yet somewhere along the line, not specified, our enemy has infiltrated them and changed them, trying to take away the lesson God would have for us. One of those charts is the Ezekiel 47 chart. We will show you the tricks that have been made on this chart. Posting will be Brother Wilford, Sister D, and myself. May you be blessed. So, really, Peralta's the one that stirred this up. He's posted on his website and now on Truth Tellers, and they've had meetings about this, making this claim that one chart is corrupt and the other one isn't. So what are we talking about here? Well, if you're not familiar, we got these two charts here. The one on the left is a black and white original that is published in Shepherd's Rod Volume 2, page 294. And this is an exact reproduction of it. It's a digital scan. And then the one on the right, the colorized chart, is one that has been used by Mountaindale, and they currently use that. So the claim is that one's been corrupted, and the devil's been busy tricking us, trying to change the meaning and all that. So that's the basis of this. But the question is this true or not? Or where did this large color chart come from anyway? And so there's a lot of details that have been left out. And so that's our purpose here, is to really get into this and get the facts out before we jump to conclusions. So here are the allegations that have been made. The marishes are incorrect in the colored chart. They should be dead places, i.e. no living matter. We'll look at that. The arrows pointing from, this is another claim, from Zechariah 13:1 and 2, and the great multitude are incorrect in the colored chart. Oh my, so those arrows are misleading people. That's the allegation. We're going to look at that. The colored chart shows Ezekiel swimming, which is incorrect. Okay, we're going to look at that. Ezekiel 9 takes place at the first open gate over on the left-hand side under the antitypical temple portion in Gedi. This was a claim made by Rob Peralta in one of his blog posts. He might be backing off on this a little bit, along with this next conclusion that the area between the first and second barriers is the outer court, the time of the kingdom where the great multitude come in. Well, he has backed off on this. I think maybe he came to his senses, or some people pointed it out, that he was grossly misinterpreting that. So in his last video, he acknowledged that he had gone a little afar with private interpretations. Well, we're hopeful that he'll continue to acknowledge the facts and state things the way they really are. We'll pray and hope for that end. So once again, we come back to the attempt to pit one chart versus the other. Is one right, one's wrong, or what's the whole origin of these charts? And so that's what we really want to document carefully here. So the one claim made is that the arrow here, okay, you see over on the left-hand chart, it goes from the reference Zechariah 13:1 and 2 straight down, pointing to the fountain. And then in the colorized version, the arrow from those verses goes down and it stops short and it points to the grass. So therefore, it's incorrect. Come on, let's be logical thinkers and not bait hunters. The connection between Zechariah 1 and 3 and grass is illogical. It's nonsensical. It's not biblical. So clearly, that's not the intended meaning. It's not an attempt to trick us or lead us astray. If you look at it, the arrow is pointing down, once again, to the fountain. The fact that the artist that revised this did not bring the arrow down all the way to the fountain perhaps is an oversight, but it's not an attempt to trick us. So let's not make a mountain out of a molehill on this one. And the same goes for this next point here, is the arrow going on the old chart from the great multitude straight down to the river. Okay? Because the water represents two things. If you understand symbology, it represents truth and the people that proclaim it. On the colored chart, they make the claim, if you see the highlight there, oh, it's pointing, the great multitude's pointing to a tree. And that's obviously incorrect. Really? Step back and analyze this. And I'm thankful to a sister that brought this to our attention. Let's look a little closer at the old chart. And I'll do that. Oh, okay, that we'll get there next slide. And then the other claim is that the marishes on the left show dead places. There's nothing living. And then over in the colorized version, it shows this, cattails and grass, and it's alive, and so therefore it's wrong. Folks, come on, let's be rational thinkers, logical thinkers, and not bait hunters. And so are marishes really areas of no living matter at all? Is that what the vision's showing us? And the answer is no, it isn't. So we'll look at that in a little more detail. So these are the main points of objection that Peralta is bringing up. They overlook something, and I'm thankful to the sister that pointed this out. If you look at the old chart, what about these arrows from the reference CH? That's Counsels in Health, page 209 to 212. Have you actually read that and see what it's talking about? That's what the sister did, and she says, well, it's really talking about the leaves of the trees for the healing of the nations. And so if you look at this, you see two arrows in the old chart from that reference, one pointing to the water and one pointing to the trees. That's true. It's applicable that the water representing the great multitude, those people are going to partake of the leaves of the trees for the healing of nations. So that's correct. If you go to the colorized chart, it shows one arrow pointing to the trees. So is that incorrect? No, it isn't. Because notice that the references, it doesn't make it clear whether it's coming from the great multitude or Counsels in Health 209 to 212. It's obviously the latter. So to make the conclusion that the great multitude, the arrows pointing from the great multitude of the trees, is nonsensical. Let's be logical thinkers here. So perhaps in this artist's rendition, they probably should have had a second arrow going from the great multitude to the waters or whatever. But let's not use this as an argument to make something, a mountain out of a molehill. Another thing, as we'll get into here shortly, is that colorized chart was clearly a revised version, subject to correction by the author, Brother Hadaf, and we'll look at some evidence that there are some differences between these two that we want to acknowledge, and we'll get into that. But this issue about the arrows is a non-issue. So let's move on from there. Now, the argument, the marishes are dead places. Is that really what it's saying? The scripture, verse 11 in Ezekiel 47 says, "But the miry places thereof and the marishes thereof shall not be healed, they shall be given to salt." The word marishes is archaic or Old English for marsh. That's the modern English term. If you look up the definition of marsh, we did this in our prior video, but here's from the Webster Dictionary. It says it's a tract of soft wetland usually characterized by monocotyledons, such as grasses or cattails. And there's a little photo of a typical salt marsh, which is common along coastlines of the ocean. Many of you probably seen these places. Does it mean that everything there is dead? No. Scientifically, it does involve living things like grasses and cattails. So what's the meaning about given to salt? That means it's a place where the water is stagnant. That's what a miry place is. The water's not moving, flowing. Contrasted with the river, the water's flowing. That's where the life is. So a salt marsh, if it eventually evaporates all the water, will eventually go to salt. And that's the analogy here. That's the lesson. It does not imply or mean that everything there is dead. So once again, the Peralta argument is reaching for straws. So you go back to the images. Okay, the original was a crude art form. It was not colorized, and it was done more, probably by Brother Hadaf, who was not an artist. It was a little more rough or amateurish. The revised version that was colorized shows more detail. It shows what you would find in a marsh. Cattails and maybe water lilies. Does that mean it's dead? There's no living matter? No. So don't read into it more than what's there. So the colorized version is more detailed, consistent with science and with the scripture. So it's not a deception. It's not a trick of the devil. Next issue, can Ezekiel swim? The implication is that, this chart's wrong because it shows Ezekiel swimming. Wait a minute, slow down here. Let's just read the scripture and see what thus saith the Lord. Does it say Ezekiel cannot swim? Ezekiel 47, verses 3 to 6, we'll read that. And when the man that had the line in his hand went forth eastward, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the waters. The waters were to the ankles. Verse 4, again he measured 1,000, and he brought me through the waters, and the waters were to the knees. Again he measured 1,000, and brought me through, and the waters were to the loins. Verse 5, afterward he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not pass over, for the waters were risen, waters to what? Swim in. a river that could not be passed over. Verse 6, and he said unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen this? Then he brought me and caused me to return to the brink of the river. So are these scriptures saying that Ezekiel's not swimming? No, they don't say anything. They say as he progressively moves into that river, it gets deeper and deeper, and eventually gets to the point where the water's so deep that he can swim in it. Okay? Don't read into it anything more than that's not there. And in verse 6, the angel there says, oh, he caused me to return to the brink of the river. For those of you who don't know, the word brink is archaic Old English. It means the bank. So with this in mind, the scriptures are not saying that Ezekiel cannot swim. Ezekiel can swim. The question is where is he swimming? And there we can now look a little more carefully. So in the colorized version, it shows him swimming out there kind of in the middle of the river, whereas the old one shows him coming back towards the bank or the brink of the river. If the water's deep enough, he can surely swim. The question is, which direction? Now, this is a valid point of issue. Which one is more accurate? I think it's kind of evident that the older one showing Ezekiel coming back towards the bank of the river would be more accurate. So what about the colorized one showing him swimming out in the middle of the river? Well, that gets into a question about this chart being revised. Maybe it was still in revision, and this was something that perhaps needed to be corrected. We'll never know, but we'll look at the argument that that probably is most likely the case. What we're searching for is a logical understanding of how this chart came to be. And were there issues with it? Now, we do know this, that colorized chart was, Brother Houteff, all the revised charts were done by a brother named Georgel. So Brother Houteff did not create these. So once that brother revised the chart, it was probably submitted to Brother Houteff for revision or corrections. And that's probably what went on here with Ezekiel 47. That chart was in the process of being revised. We'll look more evidence along those lines. So here is the original. Now, this point was what Peralta put in a blog post, and he seems to be backing off on it. So we're not going to rub his nose in it. But he was making that claim in that red arrow that was that outer court was the time of the kingdom. That's obviously false. He's backed off on it, so we'll acknowledge that. And he claimed that gate open there was Ezekiel 9. That is patently false. So we're thankful that he woke up and acknowledged that. He just needs to keep going. And then he came up with this ridiculous comparison between the typical temple and the antitype, showing that he still doesn't understand typology. But we're thankful that he acknowledged that. We're hoping that he'll scrub it from the internet and understand that this temple in Ezekiel 47 is antitypical. And we got this from Shepherd's Rod, Volume 2, 292. It says Ezekiel, in the 25th year of our captivity, and the 14th year after the city was smitten, in the selfsame day the hand of the Lord was upon me and brought me thither. Ezekiel 40, verse 1. As recorded in the 47th chapter, Ezekiel was shown in vision certain particulars of the temple building some years before the Israelites were made free from Babylonian captivity. It has been previously explained that the temple erected after their captivity was a type of this particular church in the time of the loud cry, the house of David. Therefore, the river coming out from the temple, according to Ezekiel's vision, is applicable at this time, and is but an expansion of this fountain that is to be found in the house of David, the church. From this fountain flows the mighty river seen in Ezekiel's vision, Counsels in Health, page 210. Thus far, we've explained the application of this fountain, the place and the time, and also the mighty river seen in Ezekiel's vision flows from it. So this is an antitypical temple. This is an important thing that a lot of Davidians get tripped over. There's a difference between the type and the antitype. They're not identical. There are similarities, but there are clear also distinct differences. So making a comparison between the typical temple and the anotypical temple can get you in trouble. And we're thankful that Peralta learned his lesson on that one. And Davidians need to do this as far as looking at feast days and other things as well. Be careful with typology. Make sure you understand how it works. Now, here's this evidence, or what he's claiming, history on the Ezekiel 47 chart, confirmed by 2 witnesses. Well, who are those 2 witnesses? Well, we're going to look into this. Actually, there's more than 2. Sister Bonnie Smith, and this is from one of his PowerPoints or videos on YouTube. You can see the title there below. Sister Bonnie Smith told us personally that Brother Houteff was not happy with the Ezekiel 47 chart. Okay, I knew Sister Bonnie very well. I collaborated with her for many years, and I can verify that she did say that Brother Houteff had an issue with the revised Ezekiel 47 chart. Now we know that it was the colorized version. So that's true. The question is, what issues did he have with it? We'll get to that shortly. Then he goes on. This is Peralta. This was confirmed by her personal assistant, Sister E. Now that's really secondhand information, but in this case, I know that sister, and anybody that has been with Sister Bonnie over time will confirm Sister Bonnie's testimony. Her oral history is remarkable. It was very consistent. Stories that I heard her say 15 years or so ago, she would still repeat accurately 10 years or whatever later. So there's no problem with that. We recently spoke to the sister, and the following information was given as relayed by Sister Bonnie to her. Ralph Georgel was the man who made the Ezekiel 47 chart. Well, actually, he was the one who was responsible for revising all of the charts, not just Ezekiel 47, so he was commissioned under Brother Houteff. There was a falling out with him in VTH. He soon left the organization. Now, we really need more information on that. How well is that documented? That's what Sister Bonnie says, but we don't know the details. So maybe it's true. But I don't know how that affects the issue on the Ezekiel 47 chart. It's not clear at all. Apparently, this chart was not to Brother Houteff's liking. Well, okay. Let's just stick with the chart and not the one who revised it. Because ultimately, Brother Houteff is the one to decide, if things get revised or corrected. We shall get into the obvious reasons as we continue the studying. Well, we've looked at those reasons, and they're not really obvious at all. The idea of the chart being authorized and sanctioned by the prophet is highly suspect. This is an opinion of Peralta. This is actually false. He next makes this claim. The idea to republish the Ezekiel 47 chart was from Florence Houteff in 1956 through the New Codes. Now, this is very misleading. Okay, there's a statement in the 1956 Symbolic Code that was not part of the New Code sermons. So let's get this straight. It was part of the other things. Those New Codes included a whole lot of other information besides the alleged, New Code sermons. So we're not talking about the New Code sermons that are obviously counterfeit. We're talking about recorded information about other things that happened in Old Mount Carmel, and that included this announcement that I posted in the prior video, that they were reprinting those Hunter charts. Okay, that is not automatically false because they're part of the New Codes. It's a recorded fact of history. Okay, so don't read into this he's trying to make it appear that it's all Florence Houteff that did this. No, it's not. And we showed, and we'll show again here, that those small charts were copyrighted in 1954 by Brother Houteff. That's a fact. Peralta does not want to acknowledge that, but it's an absolute fact. So this is a very misleading conclusion. So what are the 2 apparent issues? Let's be objective about this. Let's step back and say, let's really compare the two versions. And notice here, I've got the black and white one from 2SR 294, but I've included now not the Mountaindale version, but the actual small chart that was given to the hunters and published in 1954 and copyrighted by Brother Houteff. This particular copy belonged to Dudley Goff, and this is a digital scan of it. So you notice that the line art's the same, but the coloring's slightly different. So this is really the comparison. The question is that authorized? And the answer is yes. We'll show you more evidence. But if you compare these two, this is comparing apples to apples, okay? There are two things that pop up, and we have to be fair about it and objective. And the two issues are this. The East Gate, on the one on the left, is closed here. And a lot of people, and what's amazing is people tend to overlook this. How do I know? I have talked to other Davidians. I'll give you an example. I talked with Trevor Bingham recently about this, and he said, I never really paid attention to that. Now, why is this significant? Because in the one case, it's closed. In the revised one, it's open. That is theologically significant. And I'll testify here that I remember when Sister Bonnie brought up the thing about Brother Houteff had an issue with the chart, the colorized version, the revised one, put it behind his desk. I remember asking her, and this is years ago, at least 15 years ago, well, what was it, Sister Bonnie, that Brother Houteff objected to? Now, she never went into detail, but she said, I remember her saying it more than once, that gate should be closed, referring to the East Gate. And I'm like, I remember it. I never really thought about the significance of it. I pondered it for a long time. And I would argue that I would agree with Sister Bonnie that that gate should be closed. You notice the gate before, it's open. Now, we have an explanation for that. You can check a link in the description box below, a video where we think there's a harmonization with that. Why one gate's open and one's closed. I'll let you ponder that. But that is, because that East Gate is where Ezekiel 9 takes place. Okay, the stream, the little rivulet, goes from a little rivulet to a great river. That's clearly after purification. So that's a valid point. And the other one, of course, that's been brought up is about the issue of where is Ezekiel swimming. In one case out in the middle of the river, and the other one back towards the bank or the brink. And I think the older one is more accurate to Scripture because everything has to be verified by it is written. So those are issues, and we should seek not to pit one against the other. This is always a trap a lot of people fall into, but how can we harmonize this? And here's an argument I think that makes more sense, that they were both authorized by Brother Houteff. That's a fact. But that in that process, at the time frame, 1954, Brother Houteff was in poor health, and he died early 1955. Is it possible that he had not completed the revision of that chart? It is. It got published, but it probably needed some revisions. Now, who is authorized to make those revisions? Well, we have to be clear. Only Brother Houteff. We're not authorized to tamper anything. And a lot of people have done that over the years after the death of Brother Houteff. The temple chart, the golden bowl, adding the tube, and all of those, and changing Ezekiel 4, all kinds of evidence. We've documented that thoroughly in many, many presentations. So that would be a dangerous thing. So the idea to tamper anything, to change colors, it's serious stuff. And we're going to show you where this goes. And this is why we got to talk about this today. So when we go to this comparison, actually that chart that's colorized, this is one that was done in Yucaipa. Sister Bonnie told me. She's the one that colored this personally. Now, it's very similar, but this was enlarged. So somebody decided to enlarge that. It wasn't Brother Houteff. So when we compare these two, that's the enlarged one that was unauthorized and done sometime after the death of Brother Houteff. Now, this is where things get interesting. All of a sudden, the pre-11th hour said, well, we're recommending this chart. And I'm like, whoa, where did this thing come from? It's the old chart, but somebody colorized it. I have a question. Who authorized them to do this? Well, certainly it wasn't Brother Houteff because he's dead. So somebody cooked this up and did a Photoshop job. Let's look at this in more detail. You can look at, well, they added some detail to the trees. They colored the ocean, water, blue, or the river bluish. You can see some of the line art. So this is clearly a Photoshop job. This makes me very, very nervous. I would be very hesitant to recommend this. But this is now what's being offered up. So this opens up a whole new can of worms. Well, what's wrong with this one? Here's another professed Davidian that makes the argument that the revised one is unauthorized and we got to go back to the old one, but then they offer up this psychedelic multicolored version by the Caribbean witch doctor Lennox Sam and his group. I'm like, wow. Who authorized them to do that? So this really brings us to the issue. So which colorized chart is original and which are counterfeits? So now you get to see side by side, oh boy, which one's right and which one's wrong. Well, on the upper left, we have the original, copyrighted 1954 by Brother Houteff, small hunter chart. On the upper right, we have a colorized version that's very similar, but it's clearly different. And the differences are somebody decided to make it from a small chart, 8.5 by 11, into a full-size chart. Ukaipa did that. And Sister Bonnie told me that, and she's the one that colorized. This was one that belonged to her husband, Sidney Smith. Who authorized them to do that? Well, certainly Brother Houteff didn't because he was long dead. And then on the bottom, you got two attempts to go back to the unrevised or the original from 2SR, but then they go wild with the coloring schemes. One from Lennox Sam and one from the pre-11th hour. I think you can see that we've got some counterfeit issues here. If we're going to stick with a revised version, then we should stick with the authorized Hunter version, upper left hand. A lot of people don't understand that Brother Houteff revised charts. And we're going to show you some examples to see how there are differences. We shouldn't get all carried away. We should not pit one chart against the other, which Davidians like to do, but rather seek to harmonize. Here's a perfect example. The harvest period and the close of probation. Here's the original, came out of Shepherd's Rod, Volume 2 on the left. Obviously black and white, a little more primitive in artwork. And then the revised version, colored, much more detail. And this came out in the large chart in 1944. Now, Davidians have made a big issue. They said, well, this period, the woman sitting on the 7 heads and the beast and 2 horn is shown here, and then the revised one, they're flipped. So after Ezekiel 9, that's under the arrow, vertical arrow. After Ezekiel 9, in the old chart, it shows the next thing is the beast and the false prophet, 2-horned beast and the false prophet, and then the woman sitting on the 7 heads. If you go to the colorized version, they're flipped. The order is reversed. Oh, what's right and what's wrong? Well, some Davidians have gotten all worked up over this and run to conclusions that the colorized one was unauthorized or incorrect or tampered with. No. We have a video, check the link in the description box below, where we were able to harmonize rather than create tension. So let's be logical thinkers, not bait hunters. Here's another example. World's History and Prophetic Symbols, old one from Shepherd's Rod, Volume 2 on the left, the colorized version. It's interesting. Are there differences? Yeah. I mean, besides the quality of artwork, but I'm talking about theologically significant differences or variations. I didn't see anything major, but notice here on the bottom where that turns the corner, it has the date 1931, and then you go over to the revised one, there is no date. That's interesting. Something to ponder about. Clearly done by Brother Houteff, authorized by him. As to why, that's something to think about and perhaps discuss. You can maybe look for other variations. Now, here's one more example, the seven seals. Old one, revised one, colorized, authorized, part of the large charts by Brother Houteff. We have multiple lines of evidence to verify that that was a large chart. So that's irrefutable fact. Are there differences? Oh, well, look closely. How about that? In the old one, it shows 3 angels there. And then in the new one, they're gone. Oh, my. And then in the new one, it shows an angel there standing with a sword before the gate of Eden. And the old one, it isn't there. Oh, my. Does that mean one's right and one's wrong? No. It doesn't. Be logical thinkers, not bait hunters, folks. So it's part of the revision process. Okay, just because something isn't there doesn't mean, isn't shown visually, doesn't mean it isn't there. It might be shown in another perspective. So that's why the charts interlink. If you want to see it in more detail, go to another chart. It shows it from another perspective. That's how the message works. So don't make a mountain out of a molehill on these things. This is part of the process. So when we get to Ezekiel 47, don't be surprised that there's some differences. How do we harmonize rather than create tension? So what are some of the facts? Let's summarize those. Brother Houteff revised many charts, originally published in Shepherd's Rod Volume 2. Most of the revised charts were colorized and published as a large set, 22 inch by 28 inches, of 18 charts in 1944. Now, we know exactly what those are, and that's irrefutable forensic evidence on that. What's interesting, the Ezekiel 47 chart was not included. That's a fact. A set of 23 small charts, 8.5 by 11, or U.S. letter size, were copyrighted and published in 1954 by Brother Houteff. These included a colorized version of Ezekiel 47. Once again, irrefutable fact, and we'll show you even more evidence for that here shortly. There's no evidence that Brother Houteff authorized the publication of the Ezekiel 47 as a large chart. This appears to have arisen from the Yucaipa Association, which predated Mountaindale in the late 70s and later adopted by Mountaindale and New Waco. That's what the facts show us. So the authority to blow up an Ezekiel 47 chart and make a large chart does not exist in the message, and our recommendation would be don't tamper. Leave it as it is. There's no direct evidence that Brother Houteff may have objected to the revised Ezekiel 47 chart. But testimony from Sister Bonnie Smith indicates it may have concerned the East Gate being closed versus open. And we would agree with that. That is theologically significant. So perhaps Brother Houteff set it aside and said, oh, I'm not happy with some issues of it. There needs to be some revisions. But he never got around to it because, remember, he had a lot of things on his hand and he was in poor health and he died shortly thereafter. So this could be the case of a chart that never was finally revised, but it clearly went out as part of the Hunter charts. So we have to accept those facts. So here's the confirming evidence. New evidence I've gathered here in the last couple of weeks. Here's on the colorized version is from Dudley Goss' personal charts. Okay, and these came out of a time capsule. He was issued these as a hunter under Brother Houteff. This is an absolute fact. Now, there were reports I've heard for years that after New Mount Carmel was liquidated, the lawyer Tom Street, the assets, where did they go? Well, the money all went with Florence and her counsel, obviously. But where did the other stuff go that they didn't care about? And I heard about this pallets of materials that came from Old Mount Carmel. I always assumed it was literature. And I found out more recently it went to Bashan. The lawyer Tom Street contacted and was trying to find establish Davidian organization, and he found Bashan. And he wanted to get rid of the stuff, and so that 3.5 tons of materials from Old Mount Carmel went to Bashan. That's an absolute fact. Trevor Bingham talks about it and indicated in a controversy a couple years ago on Facebook with Lennox Sam's people saying, well, there were multiple sets of these hunter charts, which included this version of Ezekiel 47. So I was very interested, and I contacted Trevor and asked him about it. And he put me in contact with his print man, who I'm thankful gladly and respectfully provided me copies. And so here's another one. This particular version is not colorized. Remember, somebody had to color them. But this is the actual printed on English linen, exactly the same as the one from Dudley Goff, except it's not colorized. And this print man at Bashan said that there were multiple sets of these on that 3.5 tons, including large charts. They said over the years, many of them got given away or distributed, but they still had some of them there at Bashan, and I asked him for photographs, and he gladly obliged, and I'm thankful. So this is confirming evidence that the revised Ezekiel 47 chart was part of the Hunter charts, copyright 1954. And here's that documentation that I showed in a previous video. It had a cover title on those set of 23 charts, the prophet's pictorial testimony for today, and then flipped over copyright 1954 V.T. Hanoff. So this is irrefutable forensic evidence. We have to accept it. We have to seek to harmonize rather than create friction. So what can we summarize after looking into our research here? Recent controversies over which Ezekiel 47 chart to use are not based on facts, but rather imagined inconsistencies which are magnified from a molehill into a mountain. Pitting one chart against the other opens the door for private interpretations, which has been revealed by Lennox Sam's 11th Hour Church movement and the pre-11th Hour ministry. So be real careful you don't fall into that trap. Recent colorized versions of the 2SR, page 294 chart, the old black and white one, are clearly unauthorized counterfeits and should not be used. That is clear. That's why we have to say something. If you want to use the old one in your PowerPoints, then fine. Don't tamper with it. Use the black and white. If you want to use the colorized one, use the one that was published under the authority of Brother Houteff, and stick with that. Don't change anything. Accept the facts about the origin of said chart, stay in the middle of the road, and avoid those who promote their own ideas to explain apparent contradictions. So, brethren, this is a really serious issue. Don't tamper with inspiration. So we at UPA 7 are now clear. I always pondered for years whether to make a large version of Ezekiel 47. Now I know the answer. We will not. If it's ever to be reprinted, as it would be as a small chart, consistent with what the Hunters gave out, for example, based on Dudley Goff's. At this point, we're not impressed to do that, but for the sake of PowerPoints, use whatever version, the older one or the revised colorized one. If somebody brings up an issue about the variation about the gate being open or closed, then just tell them the truth. Tell them the story and let them decide. And about the issue of Ezekiel where he's swimming, these are not major, earth-shattering, things that should change the meaning of the message. Just say, well, this one, the colorized one, was revised, and there's evidence that it was not thoroughly proofread and corrected, but it was certainly sent out. And don't make a big deal out of it. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. So thank you for your time. We hope you appreciate this evidence. Let's stick with what we know to be true and not go based on hearsay or whatever. So this concludes our presentation. If you have any further questions, comments, or evidence on this subject, then please subscribe to this channel, Universal Publishing Association, for additional content, the most cutting-edge research and presentation on the advancement of the original Shepherd's Rod message found anywhere. Hit the subscribe button so you can get notifications for future videos. You request copies of any of the documents or publications cited in this presentation for print or electronic form. We share all of that information for people to look at on their own. Then please feel free to contact us anytime. Here's our email. Here's our number you can call, text, or connect with us on WhatsApp. And of course, one of our websites, yparish.org, where we document a lot of these controversies. So once again, we thank you for your time, and may God richly bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure, and to cease from man, whose breath is in his nostrils. Godspeed.